So let's get our opening panel started now. After that, I think that's an excellent way to set it up and to give us lots to talk about. And I'm hoping we can pick up on some of the things that that Manuel put in the room, put on the table for us this morning to talk about. The panel that we have is titled Direct Discretion too. We need discretion too. Directions, please, Europe's Science and Innovation Agenda for Science and Innovation. And I want to invite our three distinguished speakers to please join me here on the stage. We don't have a particular seating order, but I would suggest I'll sit here. And Maria Leptin, if you would maybe sit there. And Thierry Collin, perhaps next to me. And Patrick Kramer there at the end. Great. Thank you very much. The three panelists we have here need no introduction, really. I'm just going to mention one of their titles. I could spend the next 10 minutes reflecting on their accomplishments, but Thierry Collin, President Institut Polytechnique de Paris, among other things. Patrick Kramer down at the end, President of the Max Planck Society, and Maria Leptin, President of the European Research Council there in the middle. Great to have you with us. Now, Europe's leaders have promised to put science and innovation at the heart of the economy for their priorities, but what does that really mean in terms of research priorities? The next Framework and Innovation Program, FP10, is being shaped to a large degree by geopolitics, which we heard a little bit about too in the opening address, and that's in the form of security challenges, transatlantic tensions, and also the quest for what many are calling strategic autonomy in Europe, or at least sovereignty. Well, this raises big questions that we're going to explore over the next 45 minutes or so. First of all, how can Europe keep science broad-minded and open, the science system, while addressing industrial and security imperatives, which are kind of pulling things back? How should FP10 help Europe reach its strategic goals while sufficiently fostering curiosity-driven research? Now, this tension is not new, of course, but it's happening in a different context now. Different pressures are there, severe pressures, it must be said. And we need to kind of bring those into our conversation. So I'd like to get the conversation started by talking about Europe's research agenda in this context, in this very challenging geopolitical environment. The question being, how can Europe stay open in its science system? How can European science remain open and global while responding to these new security and industrial imperatives? And this puts pressure to some degree on curiosity-driven research, but I don't know. Maybe you tell me. Let's start with you, Professor Leptin, Maria Leptin. How do you see this from your perspective as President of the European Research Council, which prides itself on its independence?
Is this on? Okay. Yeah, well, big questions, and nice to see that Manuel has already answered many of them, but I'll return to that. First of all, I also would like to thank the Körber-Stiftung for having us here for this very topical discussion. And as a native Hamburgerin, it's a double pleasure to be back here. Yes, well, Eva Nemela mentioned optimism, and I think that's a very good starting point. Optimism, but without being naive. Optimism about what has been proposed and not being naive about how safe we might be. You know, we see what's happened in the US. When I talk to politicians, I sometimes hear, oh, couldn't happen here. What? With what we're seeing in certain countries in Europe, it can happen here. So I would say optimism, but not naive. The optimism, I think it's fantastic what President von der Leyen has achieved in massaging the EU budget, in being bold, in changing the structure. She clearly was too bold. The scientific community didn't like it. The Competitiveness Fund encompassing everything about research, there was concern, and some of that concern persists. But she also showed that she listens. At the last minute, they agreed to a standalone framework program. So I think that she and her minions, her administration, really need to be commended for that, that they made this swerve. And so that makes me optimistic. Can we be fully optimistic? Manuel, you've harped on the independence. You mentioned independence again. The framework program, the standalone framework program, is written into the program with a good budget. They say doubling, but as scientists, we don't quite see how 95 to 175 is doubling, but let's not be pedantic. But as you said, this needs to be fought for, and we have to fight for, and I prefer Manuel's number of 220 to the current 175. Two, you also mentioned the fact that we've all been emphasizing the need for fundamental science, for discovery science, blue sky science as the fountain of innovation. The distribution of funds within the framework program, the proposed distribution, has not shifted away from the 17% for the ERC to perhaps a greater percentage, even though, as you also pointed out, the majority of successful applications for the EIC, for innovation, come from the ERC. Out of 17% of the total funding, the majority of patent-cited literature comes from the ERC. Huge number of startups come from the ERC, even though the ERC is not funded for that. So that needs to be fought for. And then the standalone framework program and the standalone ERC. Yes, it says that, but it also says with strong connections to the Competitiveness Fund. Nobody explains what that is, so we'd better be careful, we'd better not be naive. And then it says with a common rule book, and that's, of course, death, as you mentioned. I think one, if I may paraphrase one of the things that Manuel said when asked about missions, it's not that there's anything wrong with missions. It's not that there's anything wrong with the aims of the rest of the framework program. It's the mechanism. It's the mechanism by which excellence or successful projects are selected, and the independence of the ERC ensures that these mechanisms can be determined, but the implementation is not independent.
Maybe we can talk about those mechanisms in a moment, because I would really like to bring in our other panelists, if you don't mind. I wanted to ask Professor Kramer to start off with, Maria Lepkin just laid out the idea of optimism on the one hand, but not being naive on the other, saying how important it is to look at this clear-eyed, and it's still evolving, right? There's still negotiations to come on the framework program and how all of these things fit together with the Competitiveness Fund, for example. Just when you look at Europe's scientific leadership, which you belong to, Professor Kramer, do you see risks or opportunities in this new environment that we're operating in, this highly pressurized, geopolitically shaped environment?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful to be here in Hamburg again. It's true, the world has become super difficult. We all know it. The US was mentioned. That's just one thing of many. I'm now going to Argentina, where professor salaries have been cut by 30%. So the world has become difficult. We get emails that some spy software is installed on a laptop of a famous scientist at Max Planck. You all know these stories. So the world has become difficult. But I think in Europe we're in a great position. And why is that? Of course, because we have the ERC, Maria. This was mentioned many times. We're all big fans of the ERC, and finally, we also have the statistics that indeed, the best possible science leads to the best patents, more startups, more successful companies. So we have also proof of that. That's wonderful. But what I mean is in a more global sense. Why is it so great to be in Europe at this time? Well, we will continue our partnership with the US. We will do the opposite of what the politicians do in the US to isolate themselves. We will strengthen our partnership. And at the same time, we can do that at the same time we're open to the whole world. For example, Max Planck, we just celebrated last year 50 years of collaboration with the Chinese Academy. It was started when Mao Zedong was still there. So the scientists are connected throughout the world. We are not naive. We are critical and we have a constructive dialogue. But as Europeans, we are not only open to the whole world, we can choose our partners. We also lead by example. And what do I mean? It's first of all the academic freedom, right? I mean, people who come to us, they can choose their topics, they bring their research. We recruit them for their research. We ask them to do what they are most interested in. So academic freedom. But the second is the autonomy of our institutions. I know this is endangered in many, it's for European institutions, but also on the national level. There's always, this will to steer from the political side to steer in a certain direction. And by the way, in a democracy, that is justified because the people who elect the politician may have a certain interest, to get certain products, to have cheap electricity, this or that, to live in a society that is sustainable. So it's a clear wish from the taxpayer, and then the politician also has a wish to the science. But our institutions need to be autonomous, and they are autonomous in many cases, and we have to, I think, be active, as was just mentioned. Maybe not activist, but active, to be active. To preserve this autonomy. And in this whole framework, I want to mention one last point, why Europe is so exciting and so important in terms of a scientific enterprise. It's that, out of that great science, from the many talents and the ideas, we strengthen the economy, and we will talk about that in detail for sure. But don't forget that we also strengthen our democracies. We're living in the post-factual age, right? We are not an industrial society anymore. We are an information society. And we educate people, and they become critical thinkers. And they protect us from a world where, it's impossible to distinguish facts from fiction. So science and education also serve to protect our democracies. And we shouldn't forget that before we talk about innovation, which is all important. Thank you.
Yes, the challenges of living in a post-factual world, yes, we could talk about a lot about that for sure. No, thank you very much. So I want to bring in Professor Caron here regarding the position of universities in this context, because we heard it was just suggested that openness is still being preserved. Working with scientists in China was just mentioned. I would maybe counter that to some degree by saying that connections to countries like China, like Russia, it may be becoming more difficult in the current geopolitical context. Science, of course, is trying to remain independent of all of that, but it's a huge challenge, and for universities as well. I would so ask you, Professor Caron, how should universities position themselves in this situation, and what sort of challenges and opportunities do you see in this current context, and do you share the optimism of the other two panelists?
Yes, I share a lot with the other two panelists. First, how to combine openness with strategic autonomy. That's the name of the game. That's the name of the game at the European level. Europe is an entity. It has strength, it has identity, but compared to the two other main powers, its characteristic is that it's open, not dominating, but open. Okay. Now, as far as science is concerned, I mean, by nature, it has to be opened in some respect. I mean, as Maria said, we should be open but not naive. Now, how does it work in concrete terms? Maria acts at the European level, Patrick acts at the national level, I act as a local level, and I would like to argue that we have to act at all scales and to combine openness with autonomy at all these scales. So let's take examples. I mean, I will take the example of my institution and the way it interacts. I'm in charge of the Institut Polytechnique de Paris, which is a merger of 6 prestigious engineering schools, objects that are rooted in the French 18th century, very French, some of them are somewhat ancient, and my job is to turn this into an international object of the 21st century. Now we have 2 schools, the École Polytechnique and ENSTA, that are under the Ministry of Defense. 2 other schools are connected, are under the Ministry of, 3 other schools are under the Ministry of Economy, but 2 of them, Télécom Paris, Télécom Sud Paris, deal with digital sovereignty. If I had a motto to connect to IP Paris, it would be sovereignty. We tackle sovereignty issues. Nevertheless, we have 40% international staff, 40% international students. So it's possible to have an institution that is very much connected to the interests of the country and to the interests of Europe and to the big challenges we all have, and to balance this with openness, and not only openness, but attractivity. I mean, Choose Europe is an extremely interesting program, and we have at our level to attract as many outstanding scientists and students from all over the world as we can. Now, second scale. Today, I speak also on behalf of UDIS. UDIS is a play of words about it's U10, but we are 13 institutions. Sorry, we started at 10, now we are 13. They are the research-intensive universities in France. As you know, the French landscape was pretty fragmented, grandes écoles, national research bodies, universities, and we have tried, starting 10 years ago, to structure it. So now we have a premium league of research-intensive universities. Again, I mean, we act at the national level, but we all know, all these institutions know that they have to open themselves to have a real international policy, and that's at this scale relatively new in France. And also the fact that we interact more with the European institutions is relatively new. I mean, too few French people are in the European institutions.
Sorry, just intervention. Do you see the space for that growing or becoming smaller in terms of reaching out and cooperating with the rest of the world?
I mean, obviously growing. I mean, yeah, obviously. I mean, as I said, it's relatively new at this scale. Now, we, Institut Polytechnique de Paris, act in another circle, which is a European alliance, and many of the research-intensive universities act inside the European alliance. Ours contains DTU, the Danes, Eindhoven, TUM in München, Technion, and EPFL. And that's also, I mean, they are technical universities, we have a common identity, we have to act at this level too. And here, what do we tackle? The societal challenges, the sovereignty issues of Europe, and again, we try to play on the international scene. And finally, we all act in the framework that had been described by Emmanuel and Maria and Patrick. Namely, we are very keen on, I mean, of course, we support the RC. We are very keen on seeing an advanced innovation challenge being built. And we do think that these tools will help us being more efficient. And again, I see no contradiction between, I mean, our first task is strategic autonomy, that's clear, but this can only be pursued through some kind of openness and attractiveness.
Okay, so it's interesting that we're getting quite a bit of optimism coming from the panel here, which is a great way to start off this conference. There are going to be numerous breakout sessions where we're going to go into each aspect of what we're discussing here in this opening session in much greater detail. We could stick with this, but I do think we need to move on. And there's one thing that I have to ask the panel about because it's what everyone is talking about right now. It's what's being negotiated, and it is the next framework program, FP10, that is taking shape. We have heard already that FP10 is a standalone program, and there was some risk that it was going to be somehow folded into the European Competitiveness Fund. So it is a standalone program. There will be independent research supported in that through the European Research Council. But I want to know what has been learned, lessons learned from Horizon Europe, Horizon 2020, all the other framework programs, as we move into the new challenging geopolitical context, where links to the United States are not what they used to be, and this was an exchange that was vital, including the data banks that are in the United States that are under threat, that are fundamental and basic to research. I'm just wondering, how can FP10 deal with these sorts of challenges moving forward? What do you think needs to change going into FP10? What are your priorities for it as we move forward through these negotiations with the member states? And maybe start with you, Maria Leptin.
Yes, so like I said, the mechanism. We heard, Patrick said so, others have said so too, the citizens are absolutely entitled to see their tax money spent on solving problems that they face, whether it's the climate, health, clean water, poverty, migration issues, etc. So we do need politicians to say, we'll throw money at these problems. Has to be done. And, the new framework program, the new proposals also include moonshots. We heard yesterday, a couple of days ago, in a panel in Brussels, on how these moonshots can be realized and that they need coordination. So they have to be solved at the European level. We did it once for Airbus. Why can't we do it for other projects? So, the solutions the problems have to have money thrown at them, and the framework program will do that. But how do we get good solutions? And there, the ERC is the example. Let the experts decide on what works and what doesn't work, what is good, what isn't good. We have a mechanism that does that. The ERC is. Why is the ERC such a success? Yes, of course, because it funds successful scientists, but that's an outcome, that's not the reason. The reason is that we don't use any of the mechanisms that are used elsewhere in the Commission. We have panels that are hand-picked by an independent scientific council. The other programs use experts from volunteered. Very democratic, very grassrootsy, but of course, those, people who volunteer are unlikely the people who are sitting in this room who are, for example, ERC grant holder, like tomorrow's prize winner. Stefanie Wiener is an ERC grant holder. So the mechanisms that the Independent Scientific Council has put in place are the ones that work. And I don't see why they can't also be used for collaborative projects.
Do you see that happening in FP10?
No. That is, Manuel called for it. All of these programs should be, it's not the case that one size fits all. So the very same mechanism that works for the ERC isn't necessarily right for others. We hear the constant call for DARPA. Well, yes, DARPA, my American colleagues think it's not so great now. It used to be great. It has very powerful people in place, scientists who can make a decision one day, but they can also revoke it the next. So we forget that too. So every area needs their own experts. DARPA needs different ones than the ERC needs. Somebody who has to judge which small and medium businesses are to be funded need different ones. The EIC needs different ones. The danger is, and this is written in the framework program, is a common rule book. Death to all programs. So I think that's where
Common what? I'm sorry.
rule book, a common rule book. So we need simplification in the EU. Yes, we in the Commission. We need less red tape. So, you know, the common rule book might look like a positive step. But for this program, it's not. Because we don't have common aims, missions and supporting innovation and supporting small and medium businesses, collaboration. Individual researcher grants have different aims and need different tailor-made mechanisms made by experts in the field. And that's why we are calling for an enhanced independence, a protected independence for the ERC, not only in setting the strategy, but also in setting the implementation. And the others need it as well.
Thank you. Patrick Hammer. FP10, it's going to be important. It's big. There are questions about just exactly how big, double or not double what it was before. What are your priorities for that? What do you see as risks and opportunities coming through that? And what do you think needs to be preserved or rejected from the previous framework programs?
Well, first of all, I agree with Maria that funding is one issue and it goes in the right direction, I would say, what we hear. But autonomy is equally important to make sure that the funding goes to the best people and that we are open-minded, because the future is to a large extent unknown. We know that the Earth is heating up and we know why, but there's a lot of things like the pandemic that very few people could be foreseeing. And so that's why we need to be open and the institutions need to be autonomous. But I do have a couple of challenges, quite a long list. So first of all, if you look at the European research area, we have the Erasmus Plus program. I was an Erasmus student in 1992. That's probably why I'm here, because I got to know the British system, I made friends, I learned how to do science in a lab in Bristol.
It's a huge success, Erasmus.
And it's a huge success, and we need to make sure that our friends in the UK are fully joining so that the exchange of talent is as easy as it was before. So that is one thing that we must all work on. Erasmus and the exchange of talent has to be free. Second, the attraction of talent. It's all different now in this world where these huge streams of talents, are changing. People who would normally always consider the US as their prime destination now choose Canada, but also Europe and Australia, of course. But Europe, I think, is very high up on the list. So, for example, visa issues, we have to be faster. There has to be a fast lane for the best talent to enter Europe to do a postdoc or a PhD. So it's the second issue. A third issue, if I may, we have countries in Europe that are particularly strong in research, but they're not in the EU. UK is one example, Switzerland, but also Israel. And there's now a lot of talk, but to me, these three countries have to be an integral part of the European research area, and we have to also be active on that front to make sure that the best scientists are actually part of the European research area and also have access to the funding and have access to the exchange of talent and for collaboration. Just three issues that I quickly wanted to mention. So there's things to work on.
Autonomy and independence. You know what's so strange? That in our national funding organizations, we take it for granted. The DFG here is independent. And in France, in other countries, it's independent. It's only at the EU level that it's not happening.
Okay.
So we should all, every country should be willing and in fact full of conviction for fighting for this at the EU level too.
Thierry Collin, the universities many of them depend on framework program money being distributed fairly, across through these competitive calls and whatnot. But we've heard considerable criticism against that funding model already from our panel this morning and from our keynote. I'm just wondering how you view this from a university perspective, representing numerous institutions who presumably also benefit from this sort of largesse of the framework programs. I'm wondering how you view the governance issue and the mechanisms issue for the framework program, the way it's being set up, FP10.
Well, it's clear, I fully agree with what Maria and Patrick said. First, I mean, we live in very specific times, and the orientation, the design of FP10 will be absolutely crucial. I mean, that has been very well pointed out by Manuel. Second, the themes we talk about, green transition, health, defense and security, AI, digital science and so on, they are the correct themes. And we, I guess, French institutions, but universities all over Europe, we feel at ease in this intellectual setting. Now, FP10, what should it do? It should scale up, speed up, simplify. That's absolutely clear. What do we want to keep? We want to keep ERC. That's a jewel. And the way it works is, it should be an example, as Maria pointed out. Now, indeed, there should be some kind of a DARPA. We have been trying to build this for years. I mean, I was in the staff of the President Macron in the beginning of the first term. We tried to build something starting at the French level with the Germans. So it's not completely satisfactory at this stage. Now, we support the creation, we UDIS support the creation of AIC, and we do not feel a contradiction between blue sky research, excellence mechanisms on the one hand, and impact on the other hand. It has to be distinguished, but it has to be articulated in some sense, especially in a kind of technological university as Institut Polytechnique Paris. We feel that this has to be articulated even at the local level. So, yes, less paperwork, more breakthroughs, and we only know one mechanism to do this, and that's some kind of independence and putting the best scientists at the helm.
Good. I'm going to open the floor for questions in just a little while, so if during our discussions up here you have an idea pops into your head, or if you came here with a question in your mind that you would like to put to the panel, please make a note of it, and we'll be coming to you, I hope, in just a moment when we have time for that. We've been talking a little bit about the tension, or maybe lack of tension, between scientific freedom and addressing societal challenges, that these things are complementary, but there are also maybe some tensions there. I want to ask all of you just very quickly whether you think it's become more difficult to defend scientific, fundamental science, let's say fundamental science, in Europe in these times of geopolitical crisis. Is that becoming more difficult for the institutions you represent, for science in Europe as a whole? Is it harder to preserve the academic freedom, independence, curiosity-driven research? If you'd like to begin, sure.
Well, personally, I find it very easy to defend that because I believe in it so deeply. And as we've heard many times, we have the evidence. And I guess it depends on what part of the population you're talking to. And I think we just have to keep making that point. The US are actually seeing, and they will be seeing it. It's not just that they will now be losing people who work on these nasty topics such as women's health or freedom of expression or DEI or so. They're also losing their computer scientists, their AI experts, who are moving, guess where? And you didn't include this, Patrick, back to China. So China is providing freedom of research, money, good funding, no strings attached. So we've got to keep that in mind. And we should not only think of, what's it called, strategic autonomy. We should see that there's a pull from elsewhere as well. So, like I said, got to defend it more than ever and use that as an example too.
Yeah, I mean, the question, of course, is successfully defending it, right? I mean, there are great arguments for defending it, but with pressures on Europe to up its defense, it's going to have to address its defense needs. It's trying to build a stronger defense where it sees a threat from Russia in this context, an existential threat. So Europe is pouring a lot of resources into trying to make sure that Europe is secure and can defend itself, given that the United States is not providing an unconditional security umbrella the way that it did before. There's also the pressure to become economically strong, strategic autonomy, again, being that term that keeps coming around, sovereignty in an economic sense, because Europe's economy is struggling and it is facing headwinds in terms of tariffs coming from the United States, which the entire global trade order is being turned on its head. I was just in Seoul last week and had discussions with the trade minister about that. And it's not just in Europe, and we need to be very aware of this. So anyway, I just want to bring that in as extra context when scientific excellence, curiosity-driven research is being challenged under these circumstances. How do you make that argument successful for keeping it that will contribute to those goals that I just lined out for Europe? Patrick.
Yeah, first of all, I think these are the main challenges right now: security, but also that, especially in Germany, where the economy needs a bit of a kickstart again, that need to bring in new ideas to revive the economy, to transform the economy. But the third one actually is sustainability. People don't talk about it anymore. It's the biggest, the wars, everything that's terrible, but the biggest challenge to humanity in this century is global warming. 1/3 of humans live in areas where, the sea level will be, until 2100, will have reached those areas. So this is the biggest challenge.
And there's security implications from that.
So there's three big topics right now. So how do we argue? I think, first of all, we have to explain much better than in the past what we actually do. Just as an example from our side, others are doing similar things. We used to do, on average, 8 startups a year from Max Planck. Also, we are a basic research institution. We always did startups, but we want to double the number. We want to get to 15 to 20 by the end of this decade. And I just heard the numbers that we're already at 8 startups now in September for this year. So we're on a good trajectory. So we have to deliver in that sense, start in the lab, then go into an incubator, try to commercialize within Europe. For example, Proxima Fusion, they just hit 200 million. They raised 200 million. It's a startup out of Max Planck to build, a stellarator, which is basically leading the way to fusion energy. So we do have these startups. We have to communicate better. That's one thing. The second thing is to advise the politicians, how can you change things without getting all this resistance? What is not good is to tell a university, get rid of your, civil, what is it in English? It's a Zivilklausel, the phrase in your statutes that basically says you want to do only civil research. Don't offend them this way, but
dual-use research.
Basically what you should do is to provide an incentive. So for example, if there would be an incentive for collaboration projects between academia and defense industry or NATO or the Bundeswehr in Germany, it would be so much easier because you have the same principle, the principal investigator decides. So if one principal investigator says, I don't want to be involved in this, fine, don't discriminate against your colleague. If another one decides, oh, I have a great new material, I will develop something together with NATO, also don't discriminate, allow them to do that too. And you could easily do that as a politician by providing that incentive an additional, resource where people apply, and you don't have to go through these very, very difficult discussions at the universities or at the institutions. That is a proposal, for example, to go about the defense issue.
Thank you. Thierry Colon, how are you navigating all of this?
Well, it's more important than ever to tackle societal challenges because they are more pressing than ever. And it's more important than ever and maybe a little harder to preserve scientific freedom, academic freedom. But there is no contradiction between the two because as we explained at the different levels, competitiveness between scientists, academic freedom is the best tool, the best mechanisms to tackle the challenges. Let's see how we do this at our local grassroots level.
You mentioned the Defense Department.
Yes, indeed.
Cooperating, working with these universities.
Yes.
I'm just wondering how you navigate that there.
So
that would be an interesting example.
Yeah. We have, we have a number of research teams with national research organizations. They are disciplinary, math, physics, lasers, I don't know, biology. But on the other hand, we have interdisciplinary centers, and we tackle, climate change, AI, engineering for health, seas and oceans, defense and security, and so on and so forth. And there is funding and there are incentives, but nobody will force somebody to enroll in the interdisciplinary center for defense and security. That's clear. On the other hand, here is my the new vice president for research at IP Paris. His role is to Jamal Latif on the first row. His role is to set up a setting where we attract the best, we support the best, and of course on a free basis, but because the themes are well chosen, it's clear that a number of them will be interested by climate change or health or defense and security because they are relevant. So again, there is no contradiction. I would like to briefly to introduce a theme we have not spoken about. Manuel has mentioned this a little bit, but it's the connection with education and training. At the level of universities, that's our role, to connect research, innovation, and at the Institut Polytechnique de Paris, we have a very strong connection with economy, but also we train competencies. And this is relevant to what we are discussing. Arthur Mensch, the head of Mistral, is an alumnus from the École Polytechnique, and the guys in quantum, in the quantum startups and so on and so forth, many of them come from our institutions. So we have to combine we have to train competencies. That's crucial for Europe's competitiveness. But I insist that also at the level of European institutions, if the two general directorates on education and on research could work together, that would help.
Okay, thank you. See, we're getting lots of great ideas coming out here for how to make things better, which is what is the beauty of this conference. I'm going to open the floor now for some questions. I'm opening it a little bit early because I think the people in this room who are working in the scientific community and the policy-making communities. I know there are people here from Brussels, from the European Commission, but are there representatives of research institutions from all over? I'd like to be really interested in hearing your questions to the panel. So if you could just please raise your hand, and we'll start right here in the front, second row. We have a microphone coming to you, and if you could just identify yourself and address your question to either one or everyone.
Hi there, David Matthews from Science Business. I'd just like to follow up, Maria, with you a little bit on your comment about the FP10 common rulebook being death and what you meant by this, presumably nothing positive. So are you worried that this proposal of a common rulebook for the entire European Competitiveness Fund, which sort of encapsulates Horizon Europe and therefore the ERC, what are you worried about for kind of ERC applicants? They will have to go through some very different process, or ERC contracts and grants will be standardized along with other programs and be less flexible? And have you spoken to Commission officials about this, and have what they've said reassured you?
Okay, spoken like a true journalist. I appreciate that question. I'm going to collect just a couple of questions. We'll give you an opportunity, of course, to respond to that. But we have a question in the 1, 2, 3, 4th row. Gentleman in the 4th row. We'll collect that question as well before we continue.
Okay, so my name is Helmut Tosch from Hamburg, from DESI. So I wanted to again refer to what you said on international collaboration, particularly with countries of concern. So, so my experience from the German side is that, you know, the German politics, they tell me, you know, okay, Helmut, you know, we don't want to, you know, stir you rigorously, but, you know, we would like you not to collaborate. Better you don't. So now you, so when we talk about a European strategy, I mean, I have the bad feeling that you have a mess of attitudes on national attitudes, a heterogeneity of attitudes, which makes us in this, you know, competition, but also in the cooperation, extremely weak. So therefore, so I think one would need a much stronger alignment of the national strategies with the European strategy.
Okay, we'll take that as a comment, and perhaps someone would like to respond. I know Monica, my colleague here, she's going to be asking lots of questions herself pretty later on, but right next to you is a gentleman I would also like to bring in. First of all, there, yeah.
Thank you. I'm Timon Öfferlein from Springer Nature, and I wanted to revisit...
From where?
Springer Nature, publisher.
Thank you.
I wanted to revisit the issue of the silver clause, just noting Herr Kramer's statement. And looking at FP10, I wanted to put the question to Maria. My understanding is from the current proposal for FP10 is that the silver clause has been dropped for all the 4 pillars. And I wanted to ask you, do you think this could potentially have a significant impact on the rise of dual use or military defense spending by not only the ERC, but all the 4 pillars? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, well, we got several things here on the table already. The rule book, the common rule book, and we're looking at the Zivilklausel, or whatever, the question of dual use research and technologies. And I can see you have the microphone at the ready. Please go ahead.
Well, I mean, Matthew had a very direct answer, actually many questions, and the answer to all of your questions is yes. It would impact. Yes, I have talked to Commission officials. Let me just, would it affect the applicants? Would it affect the panels? Yes, all of the above. For instance, I wanted to change something at the ERC, namely that the names of the panel members would be known. This is common among most research councils throughout the whole world, but not at the ERC. So the ERC Scientific Council, and I'm glad to have one of our council members, Tom Hensinger here, refer to him in another context in a moment, agreed on this. And I asked the agency, we asked the agency, and the agency, of course, wanted to fulfill this strategic decision by the council. And it required, for GDPR reasons, I fully support GDPR, informing the future panel members and stating this in their proposed contract. Can't do that. One common contract for all panel members in the EU. Okay? That's just one example. We can't employ, we're heard, but have no decisive role in employing the senior managers who run the evaluation, whose scientific expertise is needed. Panel applicants have to fill in forms that include questions, for example, about TLR, that I bet you a philosopher won't even know what it, TRLs, won't even know what it means, because everybody has to fill in the same reporting forms, whether it's a Marie Curie Sklodowska student, a small or medium business, a huge collaborative project with many countries, or that philosopher. So yes, yes, yes.
Very good, thank you. Patrick Kramer.
Yeah, maybe try to answer Helmut Tosch's question about the collaborations with partners. So I think one thing is clear: we don't want to take the path that the US took with decoupling. It doesn't make sense for many reasons. So we need to do the de-risking. We need to be in a constructive but critical dialogue, to be open, to sit on one table. And the organizations need to have a procedure to do this de-risking, because in the end, only the individual PI knows whether there's a risk, right? It depends, where does the money come from? Where does the person come from? What is the project about? Who are the collaboration partners? Is there any, are they close to the military? Yeah. So all these questions, you need to basically analyze that project or that collaboration individually. And how can you do that? You need sometimes advice. And so we set up a whole system on these collaborations at Max Planck with a council, that can advise on a final decision, a system almost like traffic lights that we are following, low risk and then some risk which needs to be considered, and then off limits, crossing the red line. And so you need to do that work and go through the individual collaborations. So how can small institutions do that? I think it needs help on the national, maybe even the European level. It needs advice. And we just discussed that in the Alliance of Research Organizations, that we would be in favor of a national platform in Germany that provides this kind of advice to the organizations, because not every organization has all the knowledge you need.
So on the question of dual use research into things that may have dual use functions, the Zivilklausel, as it's called here in Germany, would anyone like to address that? The fact that this apparently is being removed, and how this what impact that might have opening up space on dual use research. Anyone care to comment on that?
For the ERC, I don't think it will have much. It depends on whether you're talking about potentially dual use, and then, as Tom Hensinger has pointed out, practically everything that's being done in computer science, mathematics, probably a lot of what is being done in engineering is potentially dual use. So I don't think we're talking about that, because if we start interfering with that, we block research. So it's the potentially applied stuff that is actually meant to improve our defense.
Okay.
And that isn't so concerned about with the ERC. Of course, the EU has a defense budget. It's in deficit, and the question of whether everything should be open up to that, the question then also becomes money. Will money be diverted from what was not defense to defense if everything is mashed up? I think that's a concern.
Sure.
Can I just add an aspect there? First of all, I think this term dual use we should not use anymore. We should just talk about the responsible usage of knowledge, because I agree with Maria. But second, this civil clause that many German universities have, it's somehow in conflict with the scientific freedom that we have enshrined in our Grundgesetz, in the Constitution. And so basically, you don't need to change anything, because a university can say, we want to serve society, fine. But the individual scientist can say, I want to do a project with NATO because of this and that reason. And it's also fine. So there's no reason to change that. What is important is to change the awareness, that people are aware that we are in this special situation in Europe, and that we should also consider to use the knowledge that we have to create a startup, to have a collaboration with industry, and to also think about security. I think the awareness needs to change. We don't really need to do many changes, and then just an incentive, and I think it will come naturally.
Okay, I think we have time for maybe one more question. There's a lady holding up her hand back there. If you could get a microphone to her, please.
Thank you. Monica Schofield. I'm a funding advisor, and I started my life in Framework 3, which dates me. So I'm used to some of the discussion. I'd like to return to the issues that are being raised about the implementation. There's no point in doubling the money if you don't select the right projects, the right people. When I started out in this business, I suppose, when it has indeed become a business, being an evaluator was an exciting thing to do. You got together in a room with really top people from a range of backgrounds in industry, in academia. I'm talking about the collaborative project area here. Today, I have a feeling there is a problem to get people to do this job. The Commission is finding it harder, and as Maria Lipton said, it's up to volunteers. A lot is spent on consultants to write proposals, and it's become business, but less is done about the people who are supposed to do this in their free time.
So is there a question coming out of this, or
The
is
question
this
is,
just an observation?
how do we get people to engage in the way independently and to the same standards that have been achieved in the ERC in the collaborative part of the programs?
How do you get more excellent scientists to engage with European-funded research? Reflections from the panel? I think it's a great question.
Well, unfortunately, it's become harder everywhere. The ERC doesn't find it easy to find panel members and remote referees. Journals are finding it impossible. But that's partly our own fault, because nobody is willing to make any decision unilaterally anymore. If you want to hire a technician for a 3-hour job, you almost need a panel of evaluators. So we're doing too much evaluation. The other thing is, and we heard this, I think, again, I think Manuel brought up about everything, that we have very many short-term funding tools. And if every one of those needs 4 or 5 evaluators to evaluate a 1-year project, of course we exhaust the pool. So we need to take more responsibility. Everybody needs to take more responsibility to make their own decisions, faculty decisions or whatever. And otherwise, I don't see a solution. And people here in the room, I'm happy to hear anything. We need help too.
Thierry Cohen.
Before I was at IP Paris, I was the head of the French Evaluation Agency, an independent agency, which is, by the way, under threat because we are in a strange country, but it will survive, hopefully. And indeed, we tried to simplify the processes, and I struggled with the Ministry of Finance in order to fund properly, to refund properly the evaluators. I mean, that's an important issue. At the Institut Polytechnique de Paris, we have an international scientific advisory board, top people, very generous of their time. But I mean, we have to pay for their work. I mean, that's as simple as it is. So we should simplify. We should have less evaluators. Indeed, sometimes we should take our responsibilities and make decisions. Jamal, we will, and we've got to support people for their time and their work.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. It's just, would love to go into more questions, but I've been told to keep to a very strict time regime, which I respect that. So I just want to thank our 3 panelists here for sharing their insights and getting us going, getting us thinking for the discussions that we're going to have for the rest of the day. And I want to thank our audience for engaging with this, and I wish you all a wonderful summit over the next hours, and some of you will be around for tomorrow as well. Thank you very much. A warm round of applause for our 3 panelists.